It's good.
Okay, hi everyone. Good morning or good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. Really excited for the last installment of our education series, Fired Up, put on by the Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass. We've had such a wonderful response to this program, and we're thrilled to really cap off the year with such an incredible guest. Our guest today is Karen LaMonte, who has been working in a variety of materials, including glass, since 1990. Her works range from monotype prints to really enormous monumental sculptures, both for the indoors and the outdoors. And she explores themes of beauty, gender, identity, and the natural world. I'm particularly excited for the program today because she has been working on some really phenomenal things during the pandemic, and we are going to get the first chance to look at them today, and I think you'll just be blown away. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Karen. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to the grand finale of the Year of Glass presentations. I've set up the presentation to be the first half prepared, and then the second half sort of a studio tour and a talk about the projects that are underway right now in the studio. So in the first half, I have two videos, one describing my relationship to materials and the feeling I have about all of the materials I work with, including glass. And so we're going to start rolling that. I always get excited and nervous right before pouring metal into a mold. This is the moment when an idea literally takes shape, when the thoughts behind my sculpture will take a visible form. All of my sculptures begin with an idea, but I use materials to give them physical presence, so the choice of material is really important. I am fascinated by materials because to me, they are very much alive. I work with ceramic and metals like iron and bronze, marble and glass. Each one has its own personality. Each refracts my ideas differently. I use them as metaphors for body, culture, and the environment. Part of what I think about when I choose a material is its unique history of use, meaning, and the culture that surrounds it. I love embracing the traditions while using them to express new ideas. I think clay is the humblest of all materials. It's just earth. I am drawn to it because it is rudimentary and universal. It's been used for thousands of years in every culture to make everything from daily or functional items to religious or symbolic objects. I am particularly drawn to the prehistoric Venus figurines in clay because they are some of the very first renderings of the human body. Somehow, those early ceramic sculptures resonate through time with the themes in my own work. In many ways, I think of clay as the shared flesh of our common humanity. Iron is completely different. It's human, natural, and industrial all at the same time. It's in our blood and the core of our planet. We even say that it runs in veins through the earth. I like to think of it like blood to the flesh of our planet. I intentionally rust the surface of my sculptures. Rusting iron is a material in perpetual transformation. This allows me to sculpt in 4 dimensions because time is an integral part of the sculpture. It lets me illustrate contradictions like our vitality and vulnerability, our strength and decay. I feel like rusting iron speaks eloquently about human and environmental fragility. Bronze in so many ways is the opposite of iron. It is an engineered alloy, a timeless material. It is completely man-made and it doesn't corrode. I look at all the monuments, artifacts, and archaeological finds as a version of history written in bronze, a record of both victories and failures, a vain attempt to immortalize everything from heroes to dictators. The empty clothes I create are intimate and personal, and rendered in bronze, they challenge the traditional monuments. For the nocturnes, I used silver bronze because it glows with the cold light of evening. Clouds are so amazing. I've been making works based on weather and atmosphere since art school. When I decided to make a sculpture of a cloud, I chose marble because I wanted to make the enormous size and weight of clouds tangible. I wanted to literally bring the sky down to earth. When my first cumulus sculpture was installed in Venice, I was thrilled because everyone touched it. My goal was to make the intangible tangible, and I loved that it was irresistibly tactile. I thought marble was perfect for this sculpture because it's formed underground, like slow-churning clouds frozen in time. It also evokes the skeletal remains of ancient civilizations and the statuary and temples of fallen empires. Glass is extremely difficult to work with, but I return to it again and again because its contradictions captivate me. It is the only material that lets me weave together the visible and the invisible. I use glass because its strength and subtlety let me reinterpret the female nude. I make transparent clothing which reveals the impression of a body without a biography. I see the empty glass dress as a lens that examines culture and identity. For the nocturnes, it took me years to make a glass the color of night. I was partially inspired by the ancient Egyptians who thought that precious blue stones and glass were actually pieces of the heavens. I used this gray-blue glass to make absent female forms rising from penumbral garments. The shadowy color is a figuration of night.
We are back. And I thought, so that really, I just wanted to set the stage by showing the breadth of the materials that I'm working with. And take a small pause here to see if anybody has any questions. I see there's one question or comment in the chat. So
it's actually just some information that we provided. Yeah, so
okay.
You can go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, so if there are no questions, so that really is sort of my material world. And the next thing I wanted to talk about is my technical world. And what ends up happening when I work across all of these materials is one technique starts influencing the techniques that I use for another material. For example, so much of what knowledge I acquire in the bronze casting area comes to influence the work that I do in the glass casting studio. And then the way I make the waxes in my home studio for glass casting actually completely influenced the way I made the ceramic kimonos. So there's sort of this interconnectedness between all of the technical spheres, and so then over the past maybe 20 years, I've written down every technical question that anybody has ever asked me, and created a video where we're going to go to all of the workshops I work in. In Italy, I work with metal and marble or stone. In Denmark and in the Netherlands, I work with clay, and in the Czech Republic and in upstate New York with glass in Corning, New York. So we'll sort of travel to all of those studios in the next video and look at how materials are handled and how things are made. Okay, so video number 2, and then we'll take another pause after that, because then I think there will be questions.
I am often asked how I make my sculptures. It's a hard question to answer because ideas, materials, and techniques are completely intertwined when I make art. I can't talk about one without touching on the others. Ideas are the vital spark that animates materials, the conceptual scaffolding that shapes my research, choice of materials, and techniques. I see the act of making sculpture as finding a path between ideas and their physical expression. My approach is similar to that of the Bauhaus. I don't see a hierarchy between art, science, industry, or craft. I believe the act of making metabolizes materials into meaning. The goal is sort of alchemy, turn ordinary stuff into extraordinary stuff. That's my definition of great craftsmanship. My work involves lots and lots of labor, both my own and that of the craftspeople I work with. Making large-scale sculpture demands teamwork. I love these focused relationships and am always learning something new from the people I work with. Real details are extremely important to me. Real people, real cloth, and most recently, real clouds. Creating and preserving the details is a lot of work, but I do it because they provide a bridge directly from the sculptor to the viewer. To create real clouds, I worked with climatologists who wrote a weather modeling program which they ran on a supercomputer for 5 days to make my cloud. Apparently, it was the longest calculation they've ever done. The relationship between the weight of the actual cloud and the weight of the sculpture are central to the concept, so I used a robot to carve the marble because it allowed me to maintain a very precise weight equivalency. Then I worked for 5 weeks hand carving with a team. On this one sculpture, we used everything from rasps to robots, a toolbox that spans medieval times up to the 21st century. This sculpture cumulus is 50% scaled by height and weighs 2.5 tons. For my sculptures with the impressions of bodies on the inside, I start by taking molds off of live models. Life casting is a tradition that goes back at least as far as Greek statuary. But what makes my work unique is I use this mold to define the empty space left behind by an absent body. The models are friends from art school, professional drawing models, and of course, me. I work with dresses that I find in theater shops and thrift stores, or sometimes I even sew them myself. I found the kimonos in flea markets throughout Japan. Although there are big technical differences between working with glass, ceramic, iron, and bronze, the basics are the same. First, I sculpt the original in the studio. It takes months, and I use all sorts of materials like cloth, wax, and plaster, and lots of elbow grease. I love this time in the studio. People often ask me why I don't sculpt heads and hands. It's because I am not interested in a particular person. I want to look at how the individual is defined by society, which I interpret to be the body as defined by the clothing. That's why I don't sculpt the parts of the figure that are not usually clothed. I'm probing the relationship between culture and people. Once I have completed the original, the rest is an incredibly difficult but purely technical process of rendering it exactly the same in a different material. This involves moving between positive and negative many times. It all starts by taking a rubber mold off the original. To make my ceramic sculptures, I pioneered a technique for pressing clay directly into these complex molds. I overcame the challenge of drying clay in a rubber mold by doing it very slowly from the inside out in these funky homemade drying tents. After a couple of weeks of drying like this, it gets fired in a kiln. For my metal and glass works, I use lost wax casting. I use the rubber molds to make wax replicas of the original. The waxes are encased in a refractory mold that can withstand the high temperatures of casting. When the wax is melted out of the mold, a void is left behind in the exact shape of the original. The pouring is always exciting and nerve-wracking. It's also very hot. Molten iron or bronze is poured from a crucible into the mold. For glass, the cold mold is loaded into a kiln with cold glass stacked on top, and the temperature is slowly raised over many days. Once the glass becomes liquid, it flows down into the mold. Because glass is such a sensitive material, the whole kiln needs to be cooled very, very slowly or it will crack. That takes months. Finally, the sculpture is removed from the molds and the surface is finished by grinding, welding, hand polishing, sandblasting, patinating, and sometimes acid polishing. It usually takes 7 months to make a metal sculpture and over a year to make one in glass. My life-size glass dresses and kimonos can weigh up to 650 pounds each, and the bronze and iron sculptures up to 500 pounds. My ceramic sculptures are the lightest, weighing only 250 pounds. There's a lot of technical daring in my work, which of course means there's a lot of failure. Any casting which doesn't meet my standard ends up in the garbage, which is heartbreaking. But after a bit of cursing, I try to embrace the failures because they teach me so much. Sometimes the failures become the start of new artworks, like these ceramic kimonos which exploded in the kiln. I glued them back together using the ancient Japanese technique of golden joinery. Central to much of my work is the idea that imperfection is at the core of being human, and that the passage of time is as beautiful as it is inevitable. With that in mind, I anticipate and embrace the traces each process leaves behind, which I sometimes preserve in the final sculptures, like these subtle ridges in the surface of a casting, or the bubbles inside the nocturnes, which look a bit like stars, or the join lines in ceramic kimonos, which almost look like wrinkled skin, or the unique rusting of cast iron. For me, the complexities and challenges of materials and techniques mirror the complexities fundamental to being human. It can be challenging, but I engage them because it lets me express the humanity that inspires my work.
Ta-da! So I am a materials nutter and a technical nutter as well. So I thought this would be a great time if there are, I'm sure there are other makers out there or students or enthusiasts who are wondering how things happen in the studio or in the workshops that I go to. So if anybody has any questions of that ilk?
We do have a couple questions in the chat. So one person was wondering, the foundries that you use to make the castings, are those ones that also do industrial jobs, or are they specialty locations that just focus on art?
That's a great question. So most of them, they're just focused on the job at hand. So it doesn't matter really if it's industrial or art or fine art or design. A lot of designers make bespoke objects, tables, chairs, and whatnot in all of these foundries as well. The thing that I've come to notice recently, because I am in the process of scaling up, behind me you see this small iron cloud, which we're going to start talking about clouds next. I want to make that 9 feet tall, and at all of the art foundries, it was possible, but on the upper edge of what was comfortable for their working methods and their tools, their studios. And so recently I have been introduced to an industrial foundry that usually does strictly industrial work. And so it'll be my first time really going into strictly in an industrial environment to realize an artwork. So that's very exciting.
Okay.
Karen, can I ask you something? Hello? It's
Yes.
Gośka Bialek. Gośka
Oh,
Bialek.
yes.
Yes, hello. Long time I haven't seen you,
Yes.
How change because when I see these films and when I met you, first time, yes, when this was probably, I don't want to say how long. Okay, but that I remember that, mostly, for example, your glass was cast by people, yes, not by you. Only not only because it's important part, which you did in wax, yes, that your sculpture was your shape. But when I see now, how you work, I have feeling, or I don't know, maybe it's wrong, how technically you are involved in this, process, because I can see that, for example, you didn't sculpt, stone, only you ask people to program this for you. That how it's happened, these things, and how you feel that, because it looks for me like you moved from, this using hands even on this wax, and that, it generally, made for you, yes, this thing.
Well, the stone project is an interesting project. That project, I wanted to make a cloud, and I wanted it to be scientifically accurate. So I actually worked with scientists out at Caltech University, and they created a field. They used a program that created a field of clouds. And one of the sort of key points of that sculpture for me was to create a weight equivalency between the water weight of the original cloud and the weight of the marble. So that technical information was very important to me. And so the only way I could find to have a scientifically accurate cloud where I could access the data of the weight was by working with scientists. And then the only way I could figure to accurately transfer that weight into stone was with digital carving. And digital carving at this point in time is quite accurate, or quite commonly done in the first phase of sculpting stone. It's taking the place, they used to call it pointing up. People would make a like a plaster model and then mark it with points, and then transfer those points into the stone with what's called a pointing machine. So now there's more advanced technology that does that same process. And I'm not shy of modern technology or using modern technology for sculpture, because I believe it opens opportunities that weren't there in the past. I'm not sure I would be able to create something like that weight equivalency in the past, so.
Okay, but for example, with glass, how much, you are involved with, casting glass?
Like, I'm not understanding your question. I mean, I create the waxes and go to the foundry, and then the molds are poured at the foundry. And then you saw the piece getting loaded into the oven, and then I returned for the cold working and the finishing.
Mm-hmm. That you are working with cold working and
sometimes,
finishing,
yeah.
yes?
Sometimes, yeah.
Okay. So I just want to remind everyone, we do have a lot of people on the call today. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat rather than speaking up. That will really help us to keep things moving along. And if I don't get to your question right away, I will make sure to get to it before the end of the program, so you don't have to worry about your question being missed. We did have a couple more process questions real quick, Karen. A couple of people interested in how you're able to keep the fabric stiff enough to get that such a detailed, I mean, the detail in your work is incredible. So
that is, there was one part in the video where I was spraying the soft fabric. That is hairspray, and hairspray is basically liquid plastic. So I use like 3 to 5 cans of Ultra Hold No. 5 hairspray on the fabric, and that stiffens it enough, and then I can paint on liquid wax and sort of blow it in with a heat gun, like an industrial hair dryer.
Oh, wow. Okay. Interesting. And what type of glass are you casting with?
I used to cast with a lead-free glass, and recently I have started casting with a lead glass. And I'm actually might be for some works returning to a lead-free glass in the next year or so. You know, the supply chain is changing, and sometimes the quality of the glass is changing. And so when I feel it's not lining up for what I'm looking for, then I just switch.
Okay. And another thing I wanted to touch on is, I think a lot of times when we see technology being used in art, there's a tendency for us to unfortunately think it's magic and it's doing everything for us, when in actuality, it's just so incredibly difficult to learn yet another skill and yet another part of the art form that you really need to expand upon in order to evolve your work. And someone was talking about the robot that you're using for the clouds. And I don't know if it's possible to expand it all on how the computer program to express your vision was created, or what type of program was used, or anything about that process.
Well, not being a computer programmer myself, I asked the scientists that I work with who are out at Caltech, I was like, why on earth are you working with me? They literally are running a graduate program where they're studying climate change and all the factors that are influencing the, changing climate around us. And they said that artwork reaches an audience that they can't reach in their papers that they write about what they're studying. And so they really, part of their mission as scientists is to get information out to people. And they saw working with me not as a negative, but as a positive, as an opportunity to do that. And, the last Zoom I was on with them was on Monday, talking about the next phase of the work that we're doing together. And so I think it's been quite successful, and it's carrying on now into the future.
Great. I'm going to ask one more question and then we'll save the others for a little bit later. But an interesting point, especially looking at the small cloud prototype that you have behind you. And certainly it's, I think, something that all artists grapple with is wanting to scale up and yet being so worried about the cost of doing that, the failures of doing that, and what that can really do to you and your livelihood. So someone was asking, what material was really that gateway or next stepping stone to you really scaling up your sculpture?
There's two gateways, one that I'm on the threshold of now, but the first one was when I made my first large cast piece, life-size figurative piece in the Czech Republic. And I just did not have the financial power to do it on my own. Pardon me. And so so I went to study on a Fulbright in 99, 2000. And it was that stipend from the Fulbright that made that first work possible. And that really started, then I've always just saved to make more. And but now I'm at a phase where I'm trying to make a piece that's about 9 feet tall, and that is definitively outside of my budget. And so something that is a conversation that's ongoing right now is some larger corporations donating material or technology.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, why don't we continue on, and we'll get to some more questions later.
So now we're going to switch to a PowerPoint. And so the clouds are my most recent body of work. And I thought one question that people might ask is, how did you go from making dresses to making clouds? And I just thought I'd sort of flesh that out, maybe a little bit awkwardly, but I've always seen the dress work as this way of looking at an individual person in the larger context of the society that they live in. And I very much see the cloud work as these sort of deep dives into these beautifully articulated forms, as these are the individuals and they are existing in this larger network of weather. So that's sort of this idea of individuals being part of a whole, but then also being influenced by the whole, and this kind of symbiotic circular relationship. So that's for me. And then also the cloud form itself is extremely Baroque. And, you know, there were so many moments as we were carving it and working in the studio where I kept on seeing figures in the cloud. You know, there's something called pareidolia, which is where it's a phenomenon where you see, we all do it, you know, oh, I see a whale in the clouds, or, you know, it looks like a face. And I kept on seeing forms in the cloud. And then once, you know, the idea was I had learned about this weight. Sorry, I want to back up. One other sort of key component of the cloud work, or at least this particular piece, was in studying clouds, I learned about the huge weight of them. And it seemed to me to be such a great metaphor, because here it is, this object that we think of as floating so freely in space, but it's actually, they weigh tens of thousands of tons, tens of tons. And for example, the first cloud I've been working with weighs in reality about 16 tons. And I just thought, wouldn't it be amazing to take that form and bring it down onto Earth and make that weight tangible? And so, and also, I don't know, I've always wanted to roll down the airplane window and reach out and just touch a cloud. And so I wanted to provide that opportunity. And the amazing thing was that once we got it to the exhibition in Venice, everybody walked up and touched it. It was the first thing everybody did. There's just something very tactile, very human, and very intriguing about this sculpture that people really felt attracted to. Okay, so that was the very first cloud. It was a super, that was actually a threshold piece as well, in terms of thinking about doing something that I didn't quite have the financial juice to do at the moment. And also I really rolled the dice, because once I made it, it was transported directly to Venice. It was there for almost a year. And, you know, then thankfully, it was placed inside the collection of a museum where it will be appearing in due course. Okay, so after the Venice experience, I returned to my studio and I started to explore further. So in the home studio, I have 3D printers, you know, my wax forms, the carving tools, and I started integrating and moving between new technology and old technology, old materials and new ways of using them, and sort of hybridizing together craftsmanship. You know, I really see all of these. A lot of people are against the new technologies, but I'm very pro. And I see them as an extension of craftsmanship. So here's just a broad look, you know, some of the transitional figurative works and the cloud work.
If I could interject for just a moment, Karen, because that picture was so interesting that you had both examples of your sculpture there. And it was tying back into a question that Corey Hampson has patiently been waiting for me to ask, which is, how difficult is it to bounce from figurative to abstract and abstract to figurative in your sculpture? Or do you find the clouds to be also representational and not abstract?
You know, for me, they've become really figurative, and increasingly so with time. So I really see them as less specific than the work with dresses, but very, very figurative.
Okay,
So-
thank you. Please go ahead.
Okay, so these are just 3 different stones. So working with new materials is always for me a great moment of education and learning what I respond to and what intrigues me. And stone is so different from glass because the way the light moves on the surface, you're really working with light and shadow in most stones. And so the way the form is realized is by these areas of light and shadow and these deep pockets where it becomes almost black, you know, and all of the stones. So there are 2 types of marble here and alabaster. And this is just a close-up of alabaster. I knew nothing about alabaster before I started working with it. You know, I'm not a gemologist or who are the people who study stones? Geologist, that's it, not gemologist, a geologist. And so like alabaster it's so soft, you can't even imagine like carving it. And the way it grows, like they find it, it looks like a potato, they said, in the field when they go out and find it. And whereas other rocks are like cut from the earth, it kind of grows itself. So, you know, these things fascinate me. And then the other thing is just the visual power of each type of stone is completely different. You know, for me, the alabaster was all about the translucency. And then I really had this realization that particularly in the cloud work, that I'm working with transmitted and reflected light. So in the opaque works, like on the right side is a gilded bronze piece. So I've worked with bronze quite a bit, and I've looked at gilding quite a bit in architecture, but I've never brought it into the studio and actually gilded a piece in the studio. And so that I did, and I was amazed by, especially in the area where the form curves over, like how the gold is holding and transmitting the light. And then on the left side, a clear glass piece where it's all about how the glass radiates the light out. So one is sort of lit with like about the internal light coming out, and the other is about the light moving on the surface. And so as my material studies went on, you know, I wanted to stay with the same form, but cast it out through materials. I really started stretching my material palette farther than it had ever gone before. You know, in the foreground is a cast aluminum piece. And then the second cloud is a very low density opal. The third cloud is a rusted iron piece, and the fourth cloud is a gilded bronze piece. And oh wait, I was just thinking about something, but I wanted to finish the materials. No, something about light. I want to talk about, in terms of thinking about where the sculptor's vocabulary comes from. It's from my point of view, it's the choice of materials is a huge part of it, the form, the technology, but then also where the history of the material. So for example, like the glass clouds, I just want to show here, I guess this is a good, I started working with extremely low density opal glasses. And the reason is because in studying the clouds, I learned that the effect of light that I'm really attracted to is called Mies scattering. And the Mies scattering is achieved in, you know, opal glasses that you most frequently see go to a completely opaque white. But if you reduce the opalizing agent down to an extremely small amount, then you get this wonderful radiant, what is called, I learned from scientists, Mies scattering. And then here's just 3. So I worked with a glass chemist on 2 different recipes of glass to achieve the level of density that I wanted. And it's just so thrilling because I go back, once I do all of this work in the studio, I go back and I show it to the scientists who I consulted with originally, and they're like, yes, it's working. You know, particularly you can see how it's just like looking up at the sky where there's more cloud, it's denser and darker and you see more shadow. And then where there's less, it's just thinning out, you know. So those were very, very successful. And that was about 4 years of work. I know it doesn't look like 4 years of work to come up with 2 different types of glass, but there were so many challenges. And something that I became aware of very quickly was with these very low density and very sort of fragile formulations of glass, any small change in the melting cycle or anything like that completely changed the glass. So we had, I'm sure almost everybody knows, at least who works in Europe, the factory that makes the ceramic pots that the raw materials are melted for in the glass, that factory burnt down like the first year of the pandemic. And so at the factory I was working with, we had to switch to pots from Italy and France. And that ceramic, that difference in the ceramic completely changed the glasses, that even though we were putting in the same ingredients and melting down the same ingredients. So then we had to step back and reformulate everything again. So very complex, and then in the end, of course, it looks so simple, but in my mind, very much worthwhile, worth all that effort. Okay, so now we're going to go to the place where my cloud work and the nocturnes work overlaps. There's a certain type of cloud called a noctilucent cloud, which means night shining. And so once I had achieved this low density opal, I made what I call lucents, which are these sort of radiant nocturnes. And the inspiration is these clouds, these night shining clouds. And I literally, we just photographed these one day before coming on the plane to come to the States. So, you know, they're so subtle. And for me, you know, I'm still just experiencing them, but what I noticed immediately is that the surface detail, all of that detail that, you know, I work with the hairspray and the wax to preserve through the process, the surface details are really, really visible. In this piece in particular, I wanted to show this top section, just the way the light travels over and illuminates the, you know, the quality of the fabric and the structure of the clothing. You know, and I had these in the studio right in front of the window. And I could see, you know, most of the photographs are taken with controlled lighting, but as the light changed in the room throughout the day, the glass was completely transforming. So it was great. All right, so that is, oh, look at that. We're pretty much on time. So those are the sort of last views of the studio. So that was a combination of sort of materials I use, how, and a tiny little studio tour at the end. And Dimitra, if you want to.
We do have some more questions.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So one person is wondering if you've ever considered combining materials in a sculpture, and like, for example, bronze and ceramic. And if you have not, why or why not?
Yeah, I did combine, actually, one time I combined ceramic and glass. I had a ceramic kimono and I made a glass obi for it, and this little glass sort of part around the bottom, like a train, or like this bottom fold of the kimono. I actually don't know why I don't combine materials more. It's an excellent question. I think I'm a tiny bit of a purist, and I do have this strange thing that I've termed for myself material honesty, which is, I want every material to like be itself, not be pretending to be something else. But there is actually no reason why I couldn't combine materials together. So it's something I'm gonna have to think about.
Is there one material that you could say is more difficult to work with than the others, or do they all present their own challenges?
I actually think glass might be the most difficult to work with, but they really do, you think one part of something will be easier, like in the metals, the casting might be easier process-wise because you don't have to worry about something like annealing, but then you'll hit other difficulties, so yeah, but I do think glass might be the most difficult. It's the least forgiving when something goes wrong.
Right. I thought that you answered this earlier, but someone is asking, where do you get the glass that you use?
Combination of the Czech Republic and Germany.
And are you planning to, well, a couple questions about the clouds and whether they're made of glass, but I think that you just showed us the stone iterations, both indoors and outdoors, as well as different metals. I can't remember everything that was in that series that you had shown, all them next to each other.
Yeah, that was aluminum, glass, iron, rusted iron, and gilded bronze.
And have your outdoor sculptures with the clouds always been stone, or have you done those in glass as well?
So far, I've only done one in stone, and right now I'm actually working on one in iron. And that piece, that's the piece I described. I'm stepping into an industrial environment, and will be, hopefully, right now what we're working on is making it from completely recycled iron. So we're working with a recycling company and an industrial foundry. And so fingers crossed, if my dreams come true, I will make the first large cloud from completely recycled iron.
Wow. And someone is asking, how many pieces do you usually have in process at any given time?
That's a great question. The work, as the scale has grown larger, the work time on every piece is much longer. And so there's actually less in process at once. Like right now, I think there's only three things in process.
Okay, and I know that you have an upcoming show. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, sorry. Oh, there's an exhibition up right now in New York on 78th Street at Gerald Peters Gallery. So that's 78th between Madison and 5th. And in the spring, actually, I will be in a group show, Howard, down in your neighborhood at the Hillwood Museum. So that should be a really exciting group show at the Hillwood. It's opening in June, I believe. So, and anybody who is a social media person, I try to put little updates when it's appropriate about either pieces in progress or progress happening or public exhibitions on the Karen LaMonte artist page on Facebook. So feel free to follow there. And also, if anybody has questions or anything like that that they think of later after the presentation, feel free to, you can contact on my website. There's a little place where you can write a message. So, feel free, and I try to write back within a week. So I try to answer all those questions.
Right. Well, I see that we do have some more detailed questions in the chat, and I think that what I'd like to do is actually stop the recording before we get into those. So first, I just want to take a moment again and thank you for being with us today. You know, we often talk about the transformative nature of glass, and you've really shown us how materials in many mediums can be so incredibly transformative and really change the way that a sculpture emotes. And it really was such a privilege to be able to learn from you and to see that today. So thank you. And with that, I'll go ahead and stop the recording and we'll open it up to questions at large.
Okay.